All right, as we continue to do our Big East previews here, next on the list is Seton Hall. And joining me is Adam Zagoria from Zag's blog, NJ.com, New York Times. You see him everywhere covering Seton Hall and all types of college basketball and recruiting topics. Zags, really appreciate you taking some time to join me here. We'll talk about the Seton Hall team. They went 25-12 last year. Were a bit of a pleasant surprise in the Big East as they went 13-7, ended up with the 4th seed in the Big East tournament. They ended up getting kind of shafted with the NCAA tournament, at least in the minds of Seton Hall fans, of course. And then they win the NIT championship. But they're not really bringing much back from that championship team. They lost 4 of their top 5 in Kadari Richmond, Dre Davis, Alamir Dawes, and Jaden Bediako. They brought in 8 transfers this offseason, as many schools are living through the transfer portal. So we'll start here. My initial thought when I look at this group is that the roster lacks top-end star power. Do you think that's a reality of Seton Hall dealing with limited NIL resources, or is Shaheen Holloway confident with this group, and is he going about building this roster a bit differently than maybe some other schools are?
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Rick. I think you raised some good points there. I don't think Seton Hall, they don't like to talk about the NIL, but I don't think they have the NIL budget that, some other schools in the Big East and nationally have. So, it's not a secret that Kadari got a huge, 6-figure NIL payment from St. John's. I think he probably might have stayed there in another world, but most of the players left, and then Kadari was among the last to leave. So, yeah, Shaheen went out with his staff, and they got 8 transfers, and, they had their media day this week, and he seems sort of quietly optimistic about the team. I think you're right. It's deep. Maybe there's a lack of star power right now, but, he's got 6 or 7 guards and wings and 3 or 4 big guys, and it's going to be really interesting to watch how he coaches them up and how they gel. I mean, I've learned here in the last couple of years not to underestimate Shaheen Holloway as a coach, and I think anybody who does is foolish, right? I mean, this guy took a St. Peter's team to the Elite 8 a couple of years ago, and he said this week that this, he sort of built this team with that in mind. With he wants to play 10 or 11 guys, and I think it's going to be fascinating to watch.
Yeah, that's interesting you bring that up, because last year really opened my eyes to how good of a coach he was, because I wasn't real impressed with last year's roster. And even as I'm watching them throughout Big East games, I'm still not impressed with them. And yet they're finding ways to win them and finished with that 4th seed, which I just didn't think the roster was that type of talent to finish that high. I guess what concerns me is that they could end up I like the support pieces this year. I like him as a coach, but I wonder, are they going to be in a situation where every opposition they face has the best 2 or 3 players on the floor?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point for sure. But look, one thing about Shaheen's teams is they're going to play defense. He told us that this week. I don't care how much you score. If you're not playing defense, you're not going to be on the court. So it's October. Nobody's played a game yet. But in talking to the players, they know what he wants. They understand his culture. They seem to have bought into that. And, that's a lot of talk and verbiage here in October. But, I don't think you sign up to play for Shaheen unless you're going to have to put it out there on defense. So, that should help them to some extent. And then the other thing is who's going to be the captains and the leaders of the team. I think Scotty Middleton from Ohio State, 6'7" wing, who I wrote about today on NJ.com, and Prince Aligbe, who's a transfer from Boston College, seem to have kind of stepped up early as like vocal leaders. Garway Dual, who was at Providence, transferred to Seton Hall, kind of, looks like Kadari Richmond, similar body type, 6'5", 6'6", could end up being the starting point guard. And then you got, Isaiah Coleman was a really excellent freshman in the Big East last year. He'll probably have a much bigger role. Dylan Adaiwusu is, a 5th-year guy who's back. This kid Yassine Toomey from Evansville, 6'10" French kid. I think he's going to play a big role for them. I talked to him a little bit. He's got kind of an array of turnaround and post moves. So, again, it's impossible to predict these new teams with all the transfers, but I think they'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah, it is. And when I was asking you about potentially talking about this team, you had mentioned to me that prior to Monday of this week, no media members or anyone outside the
Yeah.
program had been inside practices. Do you think that was by design with Shaheen? Is he trying to keep this maybe sort of unheralded group under wraps here?
I think that's just how Shaheen rolls, man. I mean, he's not the last couple of years, he just, he's not big on media to begin with. I mean, I love the guy and I've known him for 15, 20 years, but he's not Rick Pitino in terms of how much he loves talking to the press. He'll do it when he has to, and he knows it's part of his job. But he was a little protective of his team, and he said some guys were just coming back from injuries. I think Garway had an injury, and some different guys are just integrating back in. So we hadn't had a full practice as of Monday. They'll probably be picked 7th or 8th in the Big East, and that'll be just fine with them. They were picked, 8th or 9th last year and finished 4th and beat Marquette and Providence and UConn. Obviously, that was a different team. They had been together. They had some veterans who, knew each other. Kadari was probably the number one transfer in the portal this year. So it's hard to really know what to make of this team, but, I'm not going to bet against Shaheen.
You mentioned Garway Dual as the potential point guard. That was one of the questions I had, so you check that off the list. But going back to sort of this idea of alpha or go-to scorer, one of the names you had mentioned was Scotty Middleton from Ohio State, and he's the one bit of information I've heard from Seton Hall people is that Scotty Middleton looks really good. So, I mean, you saw him a lot as a prospect playing with Brad Beal. I know I saw him a lot, and I always envisioned him as like a 3-and-D guy, maybe kind of a second or third best player on your team, but a really nice piece in that regard. Do you like him as potentially maybe the go-to option for this group?
Yeah, I do. I saw him a little bit. It was a kind of a friendly scrimmage, but he had a transition dunk. He looked, very aggressive. He's out there talking to his teammates. He looks the part. Long, athletic, long arms. So I think this is the kind of team where they're going to have on any given night 3 or 4 or 5 different guys. Could be the leading scorer, and nobody's going to play 35 minutes like Kadari and Al and Dre Davis did. I think he's going to really try to get 10 guys. That's not easy to play 10 guys, but I think he's going to try to do that. He's got a bunch of guards there like Zion Harmon, Chauncey Jenkins, couple transfers. He said could see time at the point, along with Garway and the freshman Yassim Felton. I've heard a lot about Zion Harmon. He was a kid Seton Hall recruited earlier when he was in high school, and I think for like a stretch of 5 minutes he can look like the best player on the court, and then in 10 minutes later he looks kind of average. So I think he'll have nights where he explodes and does well, and same thing with Jenkins and Middleton, and I could see Tume and Isaiah Coleman having big days, Garway. So I just think he's got a lot of options at point guard and in the front court, and we'll just have to see how the rotations settle out.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the 2 mid-major guards, Harmon and Jenkins, because both of them have a bit interesting stories. Harmon does for certain. I mean, he was at one time like a top 50 recruit and then never played at Western Kentucky after he committed there and had all types of stuff. And people thought his career was over, and then he kind of revived it. So it's good to see him getting this second chance. I'd love to see it work out for him. When you look at the center spot, I know you mentioned the Evansville transfer you've seen to me. They also have a Louisville transfer, Emmanuel Okorafor, and Wisconsin transfer Gus Yalden.
Yeah.
Have you heard anything about how the situation is shaking out there in terms of roles?
Yeah, well, it's good that you asked that. Manny Okorafor was in sweats and didn't play on Monday when we saw the team. They said he was dealing with some severe cramps and severe dehydration, but I think he's in the mix in the front court as one of the guys Shaheen mentioned, he said he had 3-4 men. So that's one of them. Gus Yalden is a guy who also is a very highly regarded recruit. We covered him on Zag's blog. I think he was a 4-star. He looks kind of out of shape. He had mono over the summer. He does not have a finely honed body at this point, but he's very skilled, and you can see he's got skills around the basket. And I asked Shy, is this guy going to play? and he said he definitely likes his upside, and he recruited him in high school, and he thinks there's a place for him, but that he hasn't been healthy in his career, and obviously didn't play at Wisconsin last year. So there, anytime you get a whole bunch of transfers, Rick, there's guys who want to prove themselves. They're on their second or third stop. It didn't work out. And I think Shaheen is, pitching that to these guys like, hey, I don't really care what happened at your last stop. You have a fresh start here. And they all know they're competing for minutes and playing time. And they see that Seton Hall has had success in the past. And now Shaw's got a track record with guys like Dre Davis and Casey Ndefo. And, these guys come here and say, I can be like that.
Yeah, in terms of that center spot, like Jaden Bediako, I know he wasn't an outstanding, like all Big East first teamer or anything, but he seemed to fit what Shaw wanted at that spot. And to me, when I look at these three guys, Manny Okorafor is the one who looks the most like Jaden Bediako in terms of like physical, tough, rebounder, dunker, intimidating presence inside. Yeah. I'm wondering if as he gets more healthy, if he might take over more minutes.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I can't say that I've seen him play. I mean, he wasn't playing Monday. He was in sweats. I'm not going to lie and say I saw him play much before that. So I think
it was limited at Louisville.
Yeah. So I think you're right. He does kind of look like Jaden Bediako, and Jaden Bediako was kind of a quiet MVP for Seton Hall last year. I mean, he really settled in there, was a force offensively. He played solid defense against guys like Klingon and Joel Soriano. So if they can kind of strike gold 2 years in a row with someone like that, it would be great. I really am fascinated by this kid, Yassine Toomey. He's 23 years old. So he's an older kid, he's mature, he's experienced. Again, I saw him score in a variety of ways. Shaw said they want to push his shooting out a little bit more towards the arc, and he shoots it now to about, 15 feet, and they want to push him out a little more. So if they can get the big guys shooting from deep and spread the floor more, then they really got something.
In my preseason preview for Seton Hall, which I posted last week, I went with Garway Dual at point, Scotty Middleton at shooting guard, Dylan Adewusu at small forward, Prince Aligbe at power forward, and Yassine Toomey at the starting center spot. Would you make any changes if you were trying to do a projection for their starting five?
Yeah, I actually tweeted mine the other day, and I had 4 of your five, except I think Isaiah Coleman's probably going to start, would be my gut.
Okay, so he maybe slides in at one of those guard spots then?
Yeah, over. I'm not sure Prince starts. Maybe he'll start some games, but I think you'll probably see Garway, Isaiah, Scotty, Dylan, and Yassine. Who you want to call the two and who the three and who the four.
It doesn't matter at that point, right?
Yeah, maybe Scotty's the four there, Dylan's the three and Isaiah's the two, however you want to call that. But that would be my guess. But again, I think there'll be nights when I think Garway Dual is the favorite to be the starting point guard, but who knows? Maybe Zion Harmon or Chauncey Jenkins emerges. We'll have to see.
I know you mentioned that they'll probably be projected to finish around 8th or so in the Big East. Where would you have them projected if you were asked to do it?
I mean, I guess you have to put them there, right? Just because you don't know what this team is. I mean, it's funny. I was at the St. John's Media Day yesterday, and Rick Pitino he was referring to the AP preseason poll, and he called it a joke because he's just like, how can you rank any of these teams with the portal? And I think the same thing kind of applies to, conference standings and preseason picks. I mean, obviously can make some predictions. I mean, I think everybody, UConn until proven otherwise is going to be the favorite. And, obviously Alabama's the favorite in the SEC, but I think, I don't know, something like 2 of the last 3 years or 3 years, the team that was picked 9th in the Big East ended up, like Marquette won it 1 year and Seton Hall finished 4th. So even if you're picked low, it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, I always say in the Big East, it feels like it matters if you're the first team or you're the last team. But if not, you're somewhere in between, and it all just comes down to the slimmest of margins there. You just got to find a way to win some games. Well,
Yeah.
Zags, really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I won't take up any more of your time. That was some good stuff on Seton Hall. And I guess the best way to follow all your coverage, because you do so much, is just following you on Twitter, right?
That's the best way. That's the simplest way, Rick. At Adam Zagoria. And thanks for having me on.
All right. Really appreciate it. Thank you.